The average American woman today owns 103 pieces of clothing. She wears about 10 of them. She throws away 81 pounds of fabric every single year, and somehow, she has nothing to wear. In 1955, a woman owned 9 outfits. Total. 9. And she looked better than any of us on our best day. Think about that for a second. We have 11 times the clothing and 1/10 the style. How is that even possible? How did we manage to turn abundance into a mess and scarcity into elegance? Here is what actually happened, and it has almost nothing to do with fashion. In the next 25 minutes, you are going to learn why a 50-cent sewing pattern from McCall's created more beauty than a billion-dollar fashion industry. Why a dress that weighed 5 pounds made a woman look lighter than air. Why Audrey Hepburn accidentally invented the most copied neckline in American history, and it was not even her designer who got the credit. Why polka dots in 1953 carried a kind of social power that no Instagram filter will ever touch. How a single strand of pearls, real or fake, could make 2 women from completely different tax brackets look identical. Why the wiggle dress forced women to walk differently, and why that was the entire point. How the First Lady of the United States bought her dresses at J.C. Penney and accessorized haute couture with dime store jewelry. Why fewer than a third of Americans attend weekly church services now, and what that has to do with the disappearance of the most beautiful dress in the American closet. And the most unsettling part? The women who wore these 20 dresses understood something about getting dressed in the morning that we have completely, totally, embarrassingly forgotten. Let's start with the dress that started everything, the shirtwaist. You know this dress even if you have never heard the name. The fitted bodice buttoned all the way down the front, a narrow belt cinched at the waist, a full skirt that brushed just below the knee. June Cleaver wore one, Lucy Ricardo wore one, your grandmother absolutely wore one. But here's what nobody tells you about the shirtwaist dress. It was not born in the 1950s. The shirtwaist goes back to the Victorian era, when women started borrowing design elements from men's shirts. That is not a metaphor. They literally took the men's shirt silhouette and said, "We can do something with this." And what they did was build the unofficial uniform of American motherhood for the next 70 years. By the early 50s, the shirtwaist was everywhere. The 1951 Sears catalog had pages of them. McCall's sold patterns for 35 to 50 cents. A woman could sew one in an afternoon on a Singer machine at the kitchen table. She could wear it to the post office, to the school pickup, to the neighbor's barbecue, to church on a Wednesday evening prayer meeting. The dress did not care where you were going. It just quietly made you look like the most put-together woman in the room. It is all, and here is the thing. The shirtwaist was not trying. That was its entire genius. It was not designed to impress. It was designed to function. And somehow the fact that it was not trying made it more attractive than any dress that has ever tried with all its might. A woman in a fresh shirtwaist, hair pinned back, a little tangy lipstick, stepping onto her front porch on a Tuesday morning. The neighbor across the street tips his hat, not fast, slow, because she earned that slow tip. Not by trying, by being. But what if I told you there was a dress that did the exact opposite? A dress that absolutely, deliberately, without apology, tried. The wiggle dress. Sometimes called the pencil dress. Narrow at the waist, narrow at the hips, narrow at the hem. So narrow that a woman physically could not take a full stride. She had to walk in small, measured steps. Her hips moved in a rhythm that was as calculated as a metronome and as natural as breathing. Marilyn Monroe wore the wiggle dress like it was her second skin. She said something that fashion people quote to this day. I believe your body should make your clothes look good, instead of using clothes to make the body conform to what is considered fashionable. That is not fashion advice. That is a philosophy. But here is the part nobody mentions. The wiggle dress was not just for Hollywood. The secretary at the First National Bank wore one. The school teacher on Sycamore Avenue wore one. The young wife walking home from the A&P with a paper bag of groceries wore one. And when she walked with that rhythm. And newspapers went unread, and coffee went cold, and men forgot what they were going to say next. The wiggle dress did not shout. It did not have to. It made a woman move through a room the way a song moves through a quiet house, slowly, with purpose. Okay, we have covered the everyday dress and the attention dress. But what about summer? The halter sundress. Cotton so light it felt like the dress was barely there, tied at the back of the neck, bare shoulders, a full skirt that swayed with every step. American women wore them in August, in Atlanta, in Charleston, in small towns across the Carolinas, where the air was thick enough to chew and the cicadas would not shut up. A woman in a halter sundress with sun on her shoulders and an ankle bracelet barely visible above white sandals. That was not just a look. That was a photograph, burned into a man's memory at a molecular level. He could be 80 years old in a recliner watching a ball game, and he would still remember exactly what she looked like walking back from the lake in 1954. But summer dresses are the easy ones. What about when the sun went down? This is where it gets interesting. The sweetheart neckline cocktail dress. The neckline dipped softly in the shape of the top of a heart. Not low, not daring, just enough. Enough that when a woman leaned forward to set down a tray of drinks at a dinner party, every man in the room remembered, just for a second, that he had once been young and nervous. The sweetheart neckline did not reveal, it suggested. And in the 1950s, suggestion was the single most powerful thing a woman could wear, more powerful than silk, more powerful than diamonds, more powerful than anything a modern fashion house has ever put on a runway. Think about that. An entire culture built on the idea that less information is more powerful than more information. We used to understand this. We have somehow completely unlearned it. But the cocktail hour had competition, because there was another evening neckline in town, and this one came with a Hollywood pedigree. The Sabrina dress, named after the 1954 Billy Wilder film starring Audrey Hepburn. Now, here is a piece of fashion history that most people get wrong. The famous white gown in Sabrina, the one that launched 1,000 copies, was designed by Hubert de Givenchy. But when Edith Head won the Academy Award for Best Costume Design for that film, she accepted it without mentioning Givenchy at all. A controversy that fashion historians still argue about. But the neckline that Hepburn made famous, the bateau or boat neck, which sat in a clean horizontal line across the collarbone, that neckline became so synonymous with Hepburn that people started calling it the Sabrina neckline. No cleavage, no skin below the collarbone, and somehow, because of that restraint, it became one of the most flattering necklines ever placed on a woman's body. American husbands in the 50s could not explain why their wives looked so beautiful in this dress. They did not have the vocabulary. They just knew that when she wore it, they wanted to take her out somewhere, anywhere. They wanted to be seen with her. They wanted other people to see her too. That is not vanity. That is pride. And there is a difference. Now let me tell you about the dress that understood aging better than any dermatologist ever has. The portrait collar dinner dress. The neckline curved around the shoulders like a picture frame. It literally framed the face, drew the eye upward, toward the woman herself, not her body, not her accessories, her. It was the most flattering neckline ever designed for a woman in her 40s, her 50s, her 60s. And here is what is remarkable. Women back then knew this. They did not fear getting older the way the beauty industry has taught us to fear it now. They dressed for their age. They leaned into it. A woman in her 50s in 1957, wearing a portrait collar dress in deep emerald green, walking into a Saturday night supper club in Chicago. She drew more attention than anyone half her age in the room, not because she was trying to look younger, because she was not trying to look younger. She was wearing her years like they were the most expensive accessory in the room, and the dress knew exactly how to show that. We have lost this. We have completely lost this. But moving on, because the most structurally impressive dress of the decade is next. And it was basically an engineering project, the strapless evening gown. Usually taffeta or Duchess satin, boned bodice, internal corsetry. Sometimes a small matching bolero jacket for the first half of the evening, which came off after the first dance. And the room would shift, quietly. The way a room shifts when a woman knows exactly what she is doing and pretends she does not. These gowns were architectural. Christian Dior's New Look from 1947 had kicked off the revival of structured bodices using new materials like elastic, nylon, and modern interfacing. By the 50s, a strapless evening gown could weigh 4 or 5 pounds before a woman even stepped into her shoes. The boning held the bodice in place like scaffolding holds a building, and she wore it. She wore it to charity balls in Manhattan, to military dances on bases in Texas, to her own 25th wedding anniversary, where her husband, 50 years old, gray at the temples, looked at her across the room and felt something he had not felt since the war. That is what a dress can do. Not a diamond, not a vacation, a dress. Okay, catch your breath. We are not done, not even close. The T-length party dress, mid-calf hem, somewhere between elegant and approachable, often layered over a stiff crinoline that made the skirt stand out from the body like a quiet announcement. Pastel pink, mint green, powder blue, lemon yellow. Women wore T-length dresses to spring weddings, to Easter brunches, to graduation parties in the backyard. And when a woman walked into a Sunday afternoon garden party in a T-length dress, white gloves to the wrist, a small flower pinned to her belt, every man on the porch felt something he could not quite name. Something in the chest, something warm and tight and slightly terrifying. He probably never tried to name it. Men in the 50s were not built for naming things like that. But he felt it, and the dress caused it. The polka dot day dress. Small white dots on navy, red on cream, black on yellow. Fitted at the bodice, full at the skirt, often with a wide patent leather belt. Polka dots were considered playful, cheerful, a little flirtatious, without ever crossing into improper territory. A woman wore polka dots when she wanted to feel light, when she wanted her husband to look up from his morning coffee and say, "You look pretty today, honey." And he would. He always would. Because polka dots had a kind of magic that has been absolutely, thoroughly, and permanently lost. Today you can buy a polka dot dress for $19 at any fast fashion website. Polyester, shipped in a plastic bag, worn twice, photographed once for social media, thrown away. Back then, a polka dot dress was an event. A woman saved up for it. She wore it for years, and it never once stopped earning her that quiet glance across the dinner table. But here is where the story takes a turn that nobody talks about. The Sunday church dress. Modest, beautifully made, often in cream or pale rose or soft gray, sometimes with a small lace collar her grandmother had crocheted by hand. Worn with a hat, always with a hat. White gloves to the wrist, a pocketbook held with both hands in the lap during the sermon. This is the dress we lost that we cannot get back. And the reason has nothing to do with fashion. According to Gallup, roughly 30% of Americans now attend religious services weekly or nearly weekly. 2 decades ago, that number was 42%. During the 1950s and 60s, nearly 70% of Americans were regular weekly churchgoers. 70%. The decline is not gradual, it is a cliff. And when that world disappeared, the Sunday church dress disappeared with it. There was a young man in every congregation who would look across the pews and notice the woman in the pale rose dress. Even if he never spoke to her, he would remember her for the rest of his life. American small towns ran on these quiet glances. Lives were built on them. Marriages began with them. We did not just lose the dress, we lost the morning, the hymns, the slow walk home afterward. The way a woman felt putting on that dress at 7 in the morning, knowing she would be seen, knowing she was part of something larger than herself. But you know what? There were also dresses just for fun. The garden party dress, dotted Swiss or fine cotton lawn, worn at outdoor luncheons and ladies' teas, paired with a wide-brimmed hat and short white gloves, gentle puffed sleeves, a delicate sash, a hem that floated a little when she walked across the lawn. Dotted Swiss, by the way, is a real thing. The fabric originated around 1750 in St. Gallen, Switzerland. It is a sheer cotton with tiny raised dots woven directly into the cloth, almost like braille for the eye. The original was made on a swivel loom. The finest versions were Swiss-made. The cheaper American versions used flocked dots, which were tiny fibers glued onto the surface. But even the cheap version looked beautiful in late June sunshine. American women in the suburbs threw garden parties the way we now throw birthday weekends. They mattered. They were planned for weeks. And the dress mattered too. A husband would look out the kitchen window and see his wife walking across the grass with a tray of iced tea, the hem of her dress catching the light. And he would feel, just for a moment, like a man who had done something right with his life. That is not a small feeling. That is the kind of feeling people build 50-year marriages on. The chiffon evening gown. Multiple layers of sheer chiffon over a fitted lining. Peach, lavender, seafoam, dusty rose. Chiffon does not sit still. It moves. It floats. It catches the air like it is alive. A woman in a chiffon gown at a New Year's Eve party in 1958, walking through a room of cigarette smoke and big band music, looked like she was barely touching the ground. Her husband would set down his drink. He would forget the joke he was about to tell. He would just watch. And later, in the car, driving home through the cold, dark streets with the radio playing low, he would reach over and put his hand on hers. He would not say anything. He would not have to. That is what clothing used to do. It used to create moments so complete that words were unnecessary. The wrap front dress, fitted bodice that crossed over at the waist and tied at the side, often in soft jersey or fine wool. It hugged a woman's figure without trying too hard, and that subtlety was its weapon. The tailored sheath dress, clean, narrow, sleeveless, often in a single solid color like camel or dove gray or navy, worn with pearls, a small structured handbag, low heels, and stockings with a perfectly straight seam up the back of the leg. This was the dress of the woman who did not need to try anymore. The woman who had already won. She wore it to luncheons at Marshall Field's, to her daughter's piano recital, to meet her husband for cocktails at the hotel bar after work. Modern fashion has tried to recreate this dress 1,000 times. It has never succeeded. Because the sheath dress was not about the cut. It was about who wore it, and what she had lived through to wear it the way she did. Now, the power suit of the 50s. The two-piece suit dress, a slim skirt and a matching tailored jacket worn together as one elegant unit. Tweed for fall, cool linen for spring. Mamie Eisenhower, the First Lady, was photographed in dozens of them. And here is a detail that I find absolutely fascinating. According to the National Park Service archives, Mamie Eisenhower would buy her dresses at J.C. Penney and accessorize them with dime store jewelry and $9.95 mail-order hats. She bought her 1957 inaugural gown at Bonwit Teller for $500 and paid for it with a personal check. The First Lady of the United States, shopping at J.C. Penney, wearing costume jewelry, and looking better than anyone in the room. Because the suit dress said something specific about a woman. It said she had taste. It said she was in command of her own life. It said she did not need to flatter anyone. And that was precisely why every person on the train car looked up when she walked past. The velvet holiday dress, deep wine, midnight green. A black so soft it looked almost blue under lamplight. Velvet was reserved for Christmas Eve, for the New Year's gala, for the candlelight service at the Methodist Church on December the 24th. A woman would unwrap her velvet dress from tissue paper inside a cedar closet. The smell of the cedar mixed with the faint sweetness of last winter's perfume still clinging to the fabric. She would put it on, slowly. She would feel a little nervous, the way she always did, even at 45, even after 20 years of marriage. And when she walked into the dining room with the turkey on the platter, her husband would look up from the head of the table, and for one full second, he would forget which decade they were in. 1 second. That is all a velvet dress needed. The Empire Bodice Prom dress. The bodice fitted closely just under the bust, and the skirt fell from there in soft layers of tulle or organza, pastel pink, pale aqua, ivory with a satin sash. American mothers spent weeks sewing these dresses by hand on the Singer machine in the dining room. American daughters tried them on in the bedroom mirror, half believing they had become someone new. And when the boy from down the street arrived at the front door with a corsage in a clear plastic box, his mouth opened slightly, and he forgot for one whole minute how to be a person. That moment, that one moment, it has nearly disappeared from American life. Modern dances have replaced it with something quicker, louder, less tender. We did not only lose the dress, we lost the boy who did not know what to say. And finally, the one that pulls everything together, the black dress with pearls. Not the little black dress in the modern sense. This was structured, sometimes with three-quarter sleeves, sometimes with a portrait collar, always worn with a single strand of pearls. Real or faux, it did not matter, because in 1955, a woman in a black dress and pearls looked the same whether she had bought them at Tiffany's or Woolworth's. That is an extraordinary thing. Think about it. The most expensive jewelry store in America and the Five and Dime on Main Street could produce the same visual result. Because the dress was not about price. It was about knowing. Knowing how to carry yourself. Knowing what suited you. Knowing that a single strand of pearls against black fabric was a complete sentence that needed no exclamation point. She wore it to the funeral that became a remembrance, to the anniversary dinner, to the night her husband took her to the Stork Club or the Copacabana, where the lights were low and the music was slow, and they danced without speaking because 30 years of marriage had taught them that the best conversations were the ones they no longer needed to have. Okay, 20 dresses, 20 quiet revolutions in fabric and thread. So what happened? Here is what happened. The numbers tell it cold. The global fashion industry now produces over 100 billion garments every year. That number crossed the 100 billion mark for the first time in 2014. Of those 100 billion garments, 92 million tons end up in landfills annually. Consumers in 2014 bought 60% more clothing than they did in the year 2000, but kept each garment for half as long. On average, a piece of clothing today is worn 7 times before it is thrown away. 7 times. A woman in 1955 wore her shirtwaist dress every week for 3 years. She ironed it on Saturday morning. She mended the hem when it frayed. She knew every thread of that dress the way you know the face of someone you love. 7 times versus 3 years. That is not a fashion change. That is a civilizational change. And it is not about being sentimental. It is not about saying the 50s were perfect, because they were not by a long shot. The 50s had plenty of things wrong with them, and any honest person will tell you that. But the 50s understood something about clothing that we have genuinely, measurably lost. The women of that decade did not dress to be photographed. Almost no one was photographing them. They dressed because the act of dressing was itself a kind of devotion to themselves, to their homes, to the people who would see them that day. The husband, the children, the neighbor, the stranger at the post office. They believed, in a way most of us have forgotten how to believe, that the way you presented yourself to the world was a small kind of love letter to your own life. And the compliments came. The looks from across the room came. The slowed-down hat tips, the way a husband would set down his coffee cup and just watch his wife move around the kitchen in her shirtwaist dress on a Tuesday morning. Those came too, but they were never the point. The woman inside the dress was the point. The dresses were just how she said good morning to a world she still believed was worth getting dressed for. And maybe that is the part we miss the most. Not the dresses, not the fabric or the petticoats or the hats or the gloves, but the feeling. The quiet self-possession of a woman in 1955 who did not need a phone in her hand or a camera in her face or 1,000 strangers on the internet telling her she looked nice. She knew. She had a mirror in her bedroom and a husband in the next room and a daughter watching her from the hallway. And that was enough. Somewhere right now, in an attic in Ohio, in a cedar closet in Tennessee, in a trunk in a garage in California, there is a 1950 shirtwaist dress folded between sheets of yellow tissue paper. It still smells faintly of the perfume the woman wore the last time she put it on. It still has the small pleat at the waist where she ironed it every Saturday morning. It still remembers her, even if no one else does. 103 garments in the modern closet. 9 outfits in 1955, and somehow the woman with 9 looked more beautiful, more certain, more completely herself than any of us with our overflowing closets and our next-day delivery and our try-on hauls filmed for strangers. Maybe the people from that time knew something we forgot. Something about elegance, something about restraint, something about how to live inside a life slowly, beautifully, without ever needing to prove it to anyone. If these 20 dresses reminded you of someone, your mother, your grandmother, your aunt who lived 3 streets over and always smelled like Coty face powder and Sunday morning, then you already know what I am talking about. And if you want to keep remembering, keep coming back. We are not done opening closet doors, not by a long shot. Stay curious. I will see you next time.